What happened? It's no surprise to hear that the America's Got Talent franchise has been going through a massive downward spiral for the past couple of years. After a string of mediocre seasons and the focus going towards more bland and generic acts, the show has slowly been losing more and more of its charm that was present in a lot of their earlier seasons. And that's not even getting into all of the accusations going on from behind the scenes, which is a whole nother can of worms that we won't be touching. AGT might still be successful numbers-wise, but it's clear that their reputation has hit an all-time low, both in terms of scandals and quality decline. And the latter of the two is most visible in their spin-off series, America's Got Talent, The Champions.
The greatest talent in the world. This is America's Got Talent, The Champions!
America's Got Talent, The Champions, to put it simply, is AGT's version of an all-star season. Various acts from previous seasons compete against one another to see which act rules them all, or something of the sort. And I'll be honest with you guys, when I first heard the idea for AGT Champions, I was completely on board with it. I thought it was a cool idea to have some of the best acts from previous seasons come back to have one big competition against each other. The concept also served as a nice change of pace from the original AGT formula, which was getting pretty stale at the time. My excitement only grew further when I saw the lineup. We had contestants like Shin Lim, Tapeface, Prince Poppycock, Jackie Evanko, and even a few memorable acts from the foreign version of the show. I was certain that this show was going to be a blast, and that this would be one of the best things to come out of the AGT series. So, I watched the first season, and my initial reaction to it was a strong... To say that my thoughts on the show are conflicted is putting it mildly. I didn't think it was bad, per se. I thought the performances were good, and this was a show that introduced Terry Crews, who made for a decent host. But a lot of the things about it didn't sit right with me. For example, the method of putting acts through wasn't one I was a fan of. It also felt a little on the short side. The small amount of final slots mixed with the low episode count made the series go by way faster than it probably should have. Also, the judges sent a lot of acts further than they realistically should have gone, further solidifying the show's alternate title of America's Got People That Make Simon Cowell More Money Than He Already Has. Putting my problems with the first season aside, however, I did see potential. I thought that with a few tweaks to the format, this spinoff would serve as a passable distraction from the main show that would air every other season, or something like that. I was a little surprised to find out that the second season of The Champions would premiere only 1 year after the first, but hey, maybe they figured out what was wrong in that time span, and this season would be a significant improvement. And, after watching this season, I can say that Season 2 did fix a couple of Season 1's problems. And somehow added several more problems that weren't present in Season 1. Yeah, not only was Season 2 of AGT Champions much worse than the first, it's quite possibly the worst thing to come out of the franchise as a whole. And this show had Tyra Banks as a host for 2 seasons. This season of Champions was worse than the Tyra Banks era of AGT.
What's her name?
Don't make him say the name,
Totally
Simon.
say the name. Totally. Say the name. Say the name. Say the name.
So, what went wrong? How did we get from mediocre to downright unbearable? Well, that's what we'll be looking at in this video. Thank you for watching Season Ferris, and without further ado, let's talk about what made Season 2 of America's Got Talent, The Champions so painful to watch. The first thing I found odd about this season of AGT Champions was its lineup. Since I'm not too familiar with the international versions of the show, I'll be talking specifically about the American contestants here. And let me just say, this does not feel like a proper all-star lineup in the slightest. While they did bring back some memorable contestants like Christian Soinev, Brian King Joseph, and the Silhouettes, there are a lot of contestants here who feel out of place for this kind of competition. For example, we have Hans, a joke act from Season 13 who didn't even make it past the quarterfinals. We have Sandow Trio Russian Bar, an act from Season 6 whose most noteworthy moment was the fact that they screwed up their semifinal performance. We have Freckled Sky, one of the few Golden Buzzer acts to not make it past the quarterfinals. And we have Spencer Horseman, an escape artist who got as far as the wildcard show in Season 7. Of course, I'm not saying that any of these acts are bad. In fact, I liked most of them in their respective seasons. The point I'm trying to make, however, is that AGT Champions is supposed to showcase the best of the best. So, while these acts are good for the most part, I don't think they're the best or even the most memorable acts that AGT has provided. And I don't think they exhausted every good act in the first Champions either. There are still quite a few acts I can think of that would be perfect for this kind of show. There's Matt Franco, Fighting Gravity, Recycled Percussion, Grace Vanderwall, Emil and Daryl, Diavolo, the Miami All-Stars, Terry Goddamn Fader, and way more acts that would have made this competition more enticing. Of course, we might end up seeing these acts later. Since there's a Season 2 of this, a Season 3 sounds like it might happen, which is honestly an idea that kind of unnerves me. Anyways, that's enough about the lineup. Let's talk about the actual show itself. For as many issues as I had with the first Champions, one thing I will commend it for is that it did feel like the best of the franchise coming together and performing. There was clearly a lot of time and effort put into most of their performances, and the competition felt quite strong. So, did this season have that same feeling? No, it absolutely did not. It's honestly hard to think of any way to make this event seem even less big. At times, I forgot this was even a spin-off and that I was instead just watching the quarterfinals of the regular show. In a sense, it was actually kind of worse. For reference, more buzzers were pressed in the preliminary rounds here than in the quarterfinal rounds of both seasons 13 and 14 combined. And it doesn't get better as the competition goes on either. Hell, Duo Transcend was the runner-up for this entire thing. Sure, their act was a lot bigger and more polished when compared to the others, but at the same time, it's Duo Transcend. They weren't the highlights of their original season either. One other problem I have with the performances regards the editing. During a lot of the acts, the show has a tendency to cut back to the judges or to some of the audience members, and it's really annoying. I get that they also do that in the actual show, but that mainly happens during the auditions or the judge cuts, you know, the early parts of the season. Here, this persists throughout the entire thing, all the way to the finals. Maybe the producers feel like showing the full performance isn't necessary because the voting isn't public, but it's still obnoxious to watch all the acts in this kind of fragmented way. And speaking of the voting, this season of Champions carries the tradition that has been going on with America's Got Talent for a while now. Putting through acts that should have been gone a long ass time ago. This happens a couple of times this season, but I think the most egregious examples of this happening are with Hans and with Boogie Storm. Let's start with Hans. As stated earlier, he was a joke act in the season that he was in. Because of this, I figured that he was here mainly just for filler in the early episodes, and based on his first round performance, that's exactly what it felt like. However, it turns out that superfans, we'll talk about them later, liked him enough to at least pass him to the judge's decision. It was between him, a singer from Australia, and a shadow dance group from Myanmar, which was clearly the best act of the three. So how did the judges vote?
Originality wins.
We're going home!
I don't know why I expected anything different, to be honest. Hans somehow found his way into the final 10, and I don't think he even knew what to do later on in the show because his semifinal and final performances were nearly identical. He was eventually eliminated from the competition, but the fact that he got as far as he did is incredibly baffling. However, Hans making it to the finals isn't the worst thing to happen this season. No, if only. This is Boogie Storm. Since I don't watch Britain's Got Talent, I don't know too much about them. From what I can tell, they were also a joke act that made it insanely far due to a mix of their odd novelty as well as Simon Cowell's outrageous support for them. Either way, I don't think their charm translates that well over on AGT, as their act is relatively tame compared to all the dumb and out there acts we see on the show every year. Anyways, they performed on the episode where it was Howie's turn to use the golden buzzer. If the episode played normally, they would have just been a simple filler act that would have been eliminated right after. However, yep, Simon steals Howie's golden buzzer and sends him straight through the finals. Now, this is a very insulting move. Not for Howie, honestly couldn't care less about Howie, but for the other contestants waiting to perform. There was no way that Boogie Storm was going to get sent through via the superfans, so by doing this, Simon essentially screwed over one of the other acts from getting through. Imagine if something like this happened during the judge cuts of the regular season. Instead of the guest judge using their golden buzzer to send through someone they like, Simon just butts in and uses it on a dumb act that barely scraped by in the audition round. That would be dumb and would not go by well with viewers. Much like how this was dumb and did not go by well with viewers. It's also just not the act of this happening, but Simon's cocky attitude throughout the entire situation makes it so much worse. Like, we get it. It's your show. You can do whatever you want. You make the same amount of money no matter what happens. But you're still making a TV show. Am I supposed to find this entertaining? I don't. And based on the Boogie Storm performance's like to dislike ratio on YouTube, I'm clearly not the only one who feels this way.
Simon, you took the golden buzzer from Howie to give it to these guys.
This is what you took away
Are
from
they worth that golden buzzer right now?
Ask the audience.
Yeah, are they worth it?
While this season does fix some issues that the previous champions had, like having the voting be not as strict, as well as making sure that Simon doesn't buzz someone when they're about to swallow a razor, that's always a plus. There are still problems with this season that the first one had. To start, I still don't like the whole superfan mechanic. The main thing that doesn't sit right with me about it is that we know next to nothing about them. Who are they? How are they selected? What's their thought process when picking which acts to go through? What makes them different from the viewers at home? At the same time, how do they represent our voice? I can understand that time constraints might not allow them to do this live and open the voting to the public, but it's also hard for me to buy into the concept of there being a collection of quote-unquote superfans making all the decisions when information about them is incredibly vague. I'm also not entirely sold on the idea that this show is, as advertised, the definitive contest to find the best acts from around the world.
If you can prove tonight, and like you said, years of training, that you are the best of the best, that's a big deal. And it's all, for me, it's about pride, doing your best. And this is a title that will live forever if you win tonight. So
Not only were the acts underwhelming, as stated before, but there also seems to be a bit of bias towards the American contestants. With the aforementioned superfans being from America, it makes sense that they gravitate more towards the acts from the show they watch. After all, the American superfans are more familiar with the journeys that the AGT contestants went through, and there's no denying that stuff like that comes into consideration when making the final decision. I mean, Hans most likely didn't go through because of his talent, but rather because of his memorability from his original season. I probably should note that Britain's Got Talent also has their own version of Champions, and the prospect of the other international shows getting their own versions doesn't seem too far out there. I can see the argument that having all of these different versions actually minimizes the bias of acts from a certain country, and that it can give even other acts from around the world a platform for them to start on. For me, however, I feel like these other versions popping up actually undervalues the title of Best in the World. Rather than having one big search to find the best act from the Got Talent franchise, we instead have several watered-down versions of the same thing. Maybe I'm putting too much stock into the Best in the World title, but that is pretty much what the show's main focus is about. All throughout, contestants are talking about wanting to win, the judges talk about how acts need to step up their game, and the last 5 minutes of every episode is used exclusively for showing which acts move on. When you take the competition aspect away, what really is the point of the show? You know, besides giving Simon Cowell his minimum wage check of $15 million. I guess it's nice to see some of the older acts come back, but that's not enough to keep me watching, especially with all of the other filler in the show. In the end, I can't find myself to care. Not about what happens during, not about the final outcome, or any of the sorts. It makes this whole ordeal feel pointless. But while we're on the subject, I guess we can talk about who won this season's champions. This is V-Unbeatable, a dance group from India who competed on season 14 of America's Got Talent. Early on, they solidified themselves as one of the season's frontrunners for their well-synchronized choreography and their incorporation of acrobatics in their act. They were even able to get a golden buzzer from Dwayne Wade during the judge cuts. With Cody Lee being the clear winner of that season, people expected this act to get at least second. However, during the finale, they ended up placing fourth, making this one of perhaps the biggest upsets in Got Talent history.
V-Unbeatable!
I was certainly shocked with their final placement in their original season, especially when they ranked lower than a choir who reused their audition performance for their final one. But I digress. The group was eventually brought back for this season's champions for their chance at redemption. They ended up performing even bigger act, getting another golden buzzer, and making their way to win this season of AGT Champions. So, knowing all of that, one question pops up. Was V-Unbeatable the best act of this season? And the answer I'd like to give to that question is... yeah, by a long shot. There really isn't an act like them. They were fantastic in their original season, and they somehow managed to up their game in this one. While there were a couple of good acts this season, V-Unbeatable was clearly at the top of the pack, and they undoubtedly had the best performances out of anybody this season. They were very clearly the deserving winners. That being said, however, something about their win just didn't sit right with me. At first, I thought my problem was just with them being a predictable winner, but that's not an issue exclusive to this season or this show in general, and that alone has never been a huge enjoyment killer for me when it comes to these types of shows. So, what was my problem? They were a good act, they were deserving, it felt like a perfect ending. But maybe my problem was that it felt too perfect. When I think about it, V-Unbeatable's win seemed surefire from day one. The weaker roster would prevent the group from having too much major competition, the Golden Buzzer would not only give them more recognition, but would keep them safe in the finals, and by sending weaker acts through, V-Unbeatable would look even stronger in comparison. Not only that, but there was talk about how Simon's comments on Marcelita Pomoy, the only other act that season who had a winning chance, was made to sabotage him from going further. Earlier this video, I asked what the point of the show was without the competition aspect, and one answer I might have is this. It was all a ploy to give V-Unbeatable their win and to provide a redemption arc. Not just for them, but for the show as a whole. When V-Unbeatable was eliminated early on in their original season, I have never seen such a public negative reception for the show before. Not only that, but their reputation would only grow worse over the course of that year with accusations of workplace misconduct from a previous judge. Of course, the notion of redeeming a show's name by giving one act their win does sound a little absurd, especially when issues of race and gender are involved. Maybe that's ridiculous thinking on my part, maybe that's ridiculous thinking on the producer's part, who knows. On top of that, I am inclined to believe that at this point, Simon doesn't care what other people think about him, as long as he's still making money. So it's definitely possible that this isn't a reputation-boosting conspiracy, and it's just another case of reality TV crap. No matter what the deal is though, this season of AGT Champions was really bad. Aside from a few good acts, this season did not at all feel like the definitive search for the best act from previous AGT seasons, but a gigantic mess of weak acts and transparent production meddling. I never thought that the show could wreak even more of corporate bullshit than it has before, but it somehow found a way. I didn't care much for the first season of Champions either, but at least it had a strong lineup and the acts felt more evenly matched. Honestly, compared to season 2, the first one feels like a breath of fresh air, and I would have been appalled by that comment 1 year ago. I don't think the season will be the death of AGT, at this point I don't think anything can kill the show, but it does showcase how far the series has fallen from grace. Ever since Simon took position as one of the judges, the direction of the series has drastically shifted. More bland acts took the spotlight, variety has become increasingly scarce, and the constant talk about how much of a status symbol the show is has become more and more unbearable over time. Personally, I'm tired of it. Maybe the show will go on for 3 more seasons, maybe it'll go on for 30 more. But at this point, my patience for the franchise has run out. This was by far America's Got Talent at its worst, and I don't see them rebounding anytime soon.